Hello and welcome to IGPP Expert Talks AI Special Series. I'm your host, Manish Tiwari, Director of Institute for Governance, Policies and Politics, New Delhi. India has just released one of its most ambitious documents yet on the future of AI, the India AI Governance Guidelines. These guidelines attempt something bold to craft an India-specific approach to AI oversight that is rooted not only in global best practices, but in the realities of our own digital ecosystem, from the diversity of languages and social context to the scale of public infrastructure and citizen-facing applications. They propose 7 sutras, which include trust, people first, innovation over restraint, fairness and equity, accountability, understandable by design, and safety, resilience, and sustainability. These sutras form the foundation of the AI governance framework. The guidelines offer recommendations across 6 pillars: infrastructure, capacity building, policy and regulation, risk mitigation, accountability, and institutional design. It highlights need for India-specific risk assessment, voluntary self-regulation, and even a new institutional architecture for governing AI, including a national incident database, transparency mandates, and pre-deployment safety testings. All of this signals one thing: India is moving from broad principles to actual governance mechanisms. And to help us understand the thinking behind this framework, its aspirations, its trade offs, and the road ahead, we are joined by someone at the center of it all, Professor Balaraman Ravindran. Professor Ravindran is one of India's leading voices in the space. He is head of the Department of Data Science and Artificial Intelligence, the Vadvani School of Data Science and Artificial Intelligence, the Robert Bosch Center for Data Science and Artificial Intelligence. At the Center for Responsible AI, his work aims to promote the responsible development and deployment of AI technologies across various domains, as well as ensuring that they are transparent, fair, and aligned with societal values. Professor Ravindran received his PhD from University of Massachusetts, Amherst, and his master's degree from Indian Institute of Sciences, Bangalore. He is an elected fellow of the Association for Advancement of AI and Indian National Academy of Engineering, as well as an ACM distinguished member. Professor Ravindran headed the drafting committee for India AI Governance Guidelines. Respected Professor Ravindran, thank you so much for being here and sparing time for us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much, sir. So I just directly want to delve into the into a very basic thing, what the committee was specifically mandated to do. What were the core tasks and responsibilities, particularly if we talk about it in Indian context, the kind of diversity we have?
So one of the things that our government has been very keen on from the very beginning, right? Even our Prime Minister has spoken about it. The fact that AI has the potential to be very transformative for India. Right. So one of the main things, the guiding principles given to us was, hey, look, we are not just looking for you to come up with a way to regulate AI, but also to make sure that we are able to get maximum use out of AI for the Indian context. Right? So what does it mean? Right? So for in India, so what are the things that we should be looking at? So when you talk about the AI policy for India, it is as much about enabling AI, responsible AI use and adoption, as it is about risk mitigation. So it is not just worry about long-term harms of the use of AI. We have to talk about that. We have to certainly make sure that there are, the government has enough tools, right, to fight any potential harms that arise from both unintended but also malicious misuse of AI. Right? And at the same time, we have to figure out where exactly India needs to invest in order to build the infrastructure, build the capacity, right, in order to adopt AI across the various sectors. It's not that this was the first document that talks about an AI policy for the country. The Niti Aayog had something out almost 10 years ago. where they
Yes.
identified the various sectors in which AI can potentially benefit India the most. They talked about education, they talked about manufacturing, they talked about agriculture, and so on and so forth. Right? So there were 5 areas in which they had already identified as sectors in which this can have the biggest impact. And of course, the India AI mission had been going on for a few years now, and they have been also been investing heavily in AI. So we wanted to have these guidelines be like a framework where the various efforts that we are already taking in terms of AI adoption and also provide a framework for addressing potential harms that come out of AI. So that was the
I
mandate
see.
given to us. Don't make it just a such a restrictive guidelines that people are scared of using AI for solving problems. Right, at the same time, make sure you strike the right balance between innovation as well as risk mitigation.
So you had talked about the underlying approach for these
Mhm.
guidelines. I
Mhm.
just want to understand a little more, like how did the committee think about the, I would say, the quote unquote Indian way of AI governance?
In AI governance, at some level, right, there are common principles. So the principles by themselves, right, do not change a whole lot. How you operationalize the principles is what's going to change, right? I mean, of course, you want the AI to be fair and equitable. I mean,
Mhm.
fairness is a principle that's going to apply to all geographies. But what does fairness mean in India? Right. So that is something which we have a rough understanding of it, right? But we don't have a codified structure. For example, in the US, right, when they talk about fairness, they talk about fairness across gender, they talk about fairness across race, they talk about fairness across, you know, monetary status and so on and so forth. And they have examples of what it is. But in India, we don't have it. Right? So India, we can talk about fairness about gender, right? But then if you think about use of language, right? So
Yes.
so we don't have a like a codification or a listing of all the ways in which gender biases is manifested in across Indian languages. So what is a bias in say Hindi, right? Might not necessarily look like a bias statement when translated to Malayalam, for example. Right, so there's a
Yes.
significant differences in way how these things get expressed in Indian languages and so on. So what we have basically said is that, hey, look, these are the principles, right? So fairness, equity, and transparency, all of these. I mean, equity in terms of access and so on and so forth. These are the principles that we have to operationalize. That's for sure, right? But how do we do this in the Indian context? Is something that the AI safety institutes, right, that have been set up now, right? So these are some things which they have to give a lot of input. So we don't have the technical, support for implementing many of these solutions that are actually available even in the Western context. We cannot transport them directly to India because we don't have the technical support. That's why we have to. That's one of the reasons we actually talk about the technically, feasible or technically supported regulations in many places in the guidelines because we don't have that support yet. So we can't go for it right away. But we need to build the technology in India. It has to be done for us. We can't transport anything from outside. That is where the Indian way of governing this is going to be called. And the second thing, which is a very unique to our Indian setting, is where we talk about innovation over restraint. That is one of the sutras that we have put in there, where we say that, hey, look, wherever possible, try to see how AI can be adopted for solving a problem that is, that's still an issue at scale for India. So that is what we are talking about. So innovation over restraint, but doesn't mean that we shouldn't have any restraint. In fact, it says that we have to make sure that we are responsibly coming up with new solutions for solving
Yes.
India's problems. So that is the one of the main sutras or principles that we have proposed here, which is very different from how the other countries talk about. In fact, when we proposed this for the initially this sutras were adopted in the free AI guidelines that we wrote for RBI. So I was part of that committee
Mhm.
also, and we were all very surprised when when everybody in the government actually accepted that innovation over restraint sutra. We thought that there will be a lot of pushback from from
Yes, sir.
first from the RBI, second from the government, but no, actually people actually loved it. they're saying, yeah, this is the way to think about how we will solve problems in India. So where we are going to encourage use of AI, right? And so that's basically the. If you want to ask me what is the India specific tweak
Indian.
that we had to do, that I would say that was one of the main things.
I think so. That also already comes to my next, I would say the point I wanted to raise was that the document has many times mentioned responsible innovation. And when you are saying innovation over restraint, and restraint is also as important as innovation,
Mhm.
I just want to how did the committee looked at it, or was there a shared understanding of the values or principles that constitute responsible innovation? Something of that, or there were disagreements about it?
So there were some discussions. I wouldn't say disagreement. So, for example,
We will.
suppose I say explanation, right? Transparency is a very important for responsible use of AI. Everybody keeps talking about how AI is a black box. But then the
Yes.
question is, there are applications where people don't necessarily look for an explanation. So, for example, healthcare. So, suppose you are talking to a patient and the doctor is saying, okay, this is a condition, why don't you go take this medicine or something like that? 9 times out of 10, they don't go ask the doctor back, hey, why are you giving me this medicine? They just basically take it and go ahead. Right? So the doctor
Yes.
should have some understanding of why the medicine was given, but not necessarily explain it at the level that each patient needs to understand what is happening. It sometimes just becomes counterproductive. For example, the patient will not have the capacity to understand. If I say something about a broad spectrum antibiotic versus a gram positive bacteria, so I'm going to give a more focused
Yes.
antibiotic, the patients won't be able to understand this kind of thing. So now the question becomes, okay, how much do you deeply ingrain this? Are you going to mandate that every AI application is going to have to explain every decision at a fine granular level? Will that be something that has to be mandated in the regulation? Or, as we have done now, leave of the interpretation and the implementation details to the sectoral regulators. Maybe the people in healthcare will understand better as to what is the requirement, what is the depth at which we'll have to give this kind of constraints for applications in healthcare. And maybe somebody in the finance sector will understand better what kind of explanation is needed in the finance. And similarly, what kind of biases we have to guard for, what kind of data sources or kosher, what kind of data cannot be gathered, and all these the restrictions on privacy and things like that could potentially have a very much a sectoral component. And in fact, many of these things are already there in the sector, right? So, for
Yes.
example, if somebody is using automatic trading algorithms,
Yeah.
so SEBI mandates that, okay, if there is an investigation, you have to disclose the details of the algorithm, right? So it's the same thing would apply to AI systems as well, right? So it's not just a question of algorithmic trading.
Mhm.
It also the similar kinds of things will apply to AI based financial advisory, all of these services as well. So it's quite likely that in many of these cases, what we talk about as responsible principles for AI are already responsible principles for non-AI based solutions. And some of these are actually apply to humans as well. Especially when we talk about bias. We don't want a biased human sitting there and making decisions.
Yes.
We want to make sure that the similar principles will apply to AI as well. So that's why we have said, in fact, the first thing that at a very urgent time scale, we have said that, hey, look, go back and look at every sectoral regulation that we have. See how would we interpret them in the context of AI, particularly things that we hear a lot of cases now about deep fakes and stuff like that. So we really have to go back and think about uh, how does personal right on your image and things like that. So how would that apply to AI generated image? Right? So all of these things. So there are so many things that existing regulations can already guard for, and that exercise has to happen at a very urgent time scale so that we are able to control even before we start thinking about passing new laws of AI harms to control AI harms. There's a lot that can be done with existing laws. All we really need to do is reinterpret those laws in the light of what if this is done through an AI agency as opposed to a human agency? What kind of questions would you ask? I think that is important.
Yeah. That is, I think that's definitely important. Because as you said, the underlying sutras, innovation over restraint, we have to have this approach because otherwise it is very difficult that way. So the
Not
guidelines,
just innovation over restraint. Sorry for
yeah,
expanding back on that.
no,
Not just
please,
innovation over restraint. If you look at every other thing, right? So we talk about fairness, we talk about accountability. So we talk about trust, right? So there are a bunch of sutras that we talk about, and many of these principles apply to humans as well. Right? We don't want untrustworthy humans, so you need to have some way in which by which you are authenticating the human and making sure that it is the right person you are talking to, and so on and so forth. So in many of these principles, right, if you think about it, it applies to human interaction as well. So it's not
sure,
just a
sir.
question of AI, not just one of those sutras, but all of the
Yeah.
principles of responsible AI would apply across the. Yes,
So
sorry.
the guidelines emphasize graded liability for
Mhm,
developers, deployers, and users.
mhm.
How will liability be enforced in complex multi-actor AI supply chains, especially in cases where developers are overseas or models are open weight? Uh,
Uh,
that is just a, yeah.
that is a challenge, right? So we don't have a good answer to that yet, right? But what we are calling out is that hey, liability should not be fixed on any one actor in the chain. It shouldn't be that hey, look, you offered a service using AI, therefore you are liable for it. Or so you understand what I'm saying, right? So it's not like the banker alone is responsible for everything that goes wrong with the AI system. It's not like the social media company alone has to take all the risks of using an AI system, even though there is like you rightly said, there's a developer. There is actually it's even more fine-grained than that, right? So there are people
Yes.
who provide data, right? There are people who build the models. There are people who optimize the models for deployment. I mean, there actually could potentially be two different actors now in the current scenario. And then there are people who build applications on top of the models that have been given to you, right? And then there are people who actually use the services. And then, so all of these people could potentially have liability. And there is no way to do this in a universal manner, right? Saying that there are certain things that
Yeah.
can be taken around. So, for example, are you using the appropriate data sources? Right? Do you have permission to use the data that you are using? Right? Are you actually accurately identifying the fact that you are using an AI system or not? So those kinds of things can be more universal in terms of the recommendations. But even then, right? So whether you are identifying yourself as you are using an AI system or not, so who should be responsible for that? Is it the person providing the service based on an AI system, or should it be the AI
Mhm.
model builder himself? Right? So this is my personal opinion. This has not been debated or decided on, but it should be the person who is actually using the AI to give a service, because the AI
Yes.
model themselves can be used in other situations where it actually is okay for you not to identify that it is an AI that you are operating with because it's obvious,
Yes.
right? So in such a case, you don't want to, every output that is coming from that to be labeled it is this output is made with an AI, because you know that you are interacting with an AI and you are using that service in that manner. But there could be other cases where there could be confusion whether an image that you see on a newspaper or image that you see on social media web pages, whether that has come from an AI source or not. It should not be on the AI developer to put that note.
Yes.
It should be on the person who is actually providing the service to you or providing the image to you, knowing that it has been generated by an AI. It is that person's responsibility. So who takes responsibility for what aspect of compliance has to be decided on a application by application, sector by sector basis. There could be some general principles which I think the recent notification that came from MeitY, right, partly
Mhm.
addresses, right, saying that okay, that you should make sure that you should ask for people when they upload images whether they are uploading an AI image or a regular image. That's fine. Right? You have to ask
Mhm.
them whether they answer truthfully or not. It's another question. But at least the
True.
fact that you're asking that could potentially cut down on a lot of bad incidents. And likewise, when you're actually displaying an image, it should be prominently clear that it is a fake image and things like that, if it is a fake. So those kinds of things are okay. Right? But then who is going to enforce it and all that? We don't have the technical. If if a user who is uploading an image lies,
Yes.
uploads an AI image, but says that this image is not being generated by AI, right? Today, I don't have the technology to verify that 100% accurately.
Yes.
Right? So if I actually run this through a fake detector, there's a good chance that a real image could also be labeled as fake.
Yeah, it could be.
And
That's
there's, I
true.
mean, if you so people who are writing now are facing the trouble because most of the text that is generated, right? I mean, even if I write it, right, it's being
True.
labeled as being generated by AI. There's a 70% chance this text is generated by AI. I mean, even though I know that I
Yes.
wrote the text myself,
Yeah.
I get that kind of classification. I'm pretty
Notification.
sure
Yeah.
people in journalism are facing the trouble quite a
Yes.
bit. And so that, given the state of the technology, so how would I enforce? It's not clear to me. So these are the gray areas still, and that's why we are recommending that before you get into the techno-legal space, we have to make sure that the technology supports us.
Yes.
That you have the technology to do that, and especially like again, it should be done in the Indian context. For example, some of the deepfake detectors are good at detecting fakes in, say, English spoken language, but
Yes.
they don't perform well when you translate it to Hindi or any of the other Indian
Indian.
languages. So that becomes a challenge. So we really need to, as a nation, we need to put more effort into building these tools as tools that give forensic support in some sense.
I
if I
think,
want to start thinking about it.
yes, what you just said has already answered my next question, where I wanted to ask you that, what are those India-specific risk assessments which global frameworks fail to capture? I think those kind of nuances and diversities are very
Yeah.
difficult to get it.
Yeah.
I want
And
to come to
in
my
fact,
next. Yes,
I'll tell you one example of something that people do, which is
yes, sir.
is going to become more important in India. So people actually are putting in guardrails, right? They're saying that you can't ask these kinds of questions to the LLM, or the LLM should not give this kinds of answers. Those kind of guardrails people are putting, and more often than not, they are tested rigorously for English language attacks.
Yes.
What people are finding increasingly is that when these models are actually being exposed to languages other than English in their training, because they're just basically taking everything from the internet and training, right? So if you use a
Mhm.
less representative language, you are able to break these guardrails easily, even though you have tested it for English. And so in India, I take an LLM, I take a Llama model and start talking to it in Bhojpuri or something. I can
Yeah.
potentially I can potentially break the guardrails that have been put in place for more Shuddh Hindi and English. Right? I can potentially break the guardrails. So this is something very India specific. So because you don't know what dialect the person is going to come and speak, and you might actually break
True.
the all the guardrails because of this. So these are new risks which we really have
That's
to call out and
correct.
sorry.
So the phrase techno-legal approach in almost every AI-related report and regulatory draft today is being used. How should we understand this concept, and what would it take to translate it into real implementable governance mechanisms? The techno-legal approach. How do we look at it?
So techno-legal, I mean, at least at a very fundamental level, right? Is
Mhm.
essentially technology, right? Verifies legal compliance of the output of the technology. So the inbuilt into it, right? Suppose I'm actually building an AI model, right, that is going to use data for training. A techno-legal solution to ensure privacy would be, a framework which rejects data, which doesn't come with the appropriate releases digitally signed to it.
Mhm.
So if you say that, okay, this database I can use for training the AI model, somebody supplies you a database that can be used for training the AI model, unless they have a digitally signed certificate that says that this data is, has been cleared for using in AI,
Mhm.
then then the AI model should not be able to use that data for training. Right? So this is the technical part, the technology part of it, right? And the legal
Mhm.
part is saying that, hey, look, DPDP says that for digital personal data, these are the things that should be complied with before you can, use it for other purposes. So therefore, that compliance is ensured by this digital certificate, and so taking everything into account, I'm able to enforce just from a technical point of view. I don't need to come somebody coming back and telling me, hey, no, this is you used wrong kind of data, because my framework does not allow me to use data that has not been cleaned. So this is an example of how it will work in practice. Now the question is, do we have this for everything that we want to
Yes.
do? We don't. So that we are still building it. So maybe the question is, do we have to take the lead in doing this, or we see the biggest challenge for me is if we wait for the the technology to catch up, for us to make sure that the techno-legal framework is in place for everything that we want to do, then we might get delayed because the technology is hard for one part of it. The second part of it is not clear to me. We know the legal framework which the technology should enforce in every aspect, in every context. So even that is, we don't have the laws yet, right? So first we have to wait for the laws to come in, and then we have to wait for the technology to catch up to enforce the laws, and then you start building the models and deploying them, and it becomes a little too late. So that is why instead of saying techno-legal right away, so we are saying we should have technology enabled.
Okay.
Legal. So that's where, so that you can start going far earlier, right? So for example, I might not be able to ensure from the get-go that the model I build is bias free, right?
Mm-hmm.
But can I build technology that will be able to evaluate every model that comes out and give you a flag that says, okay, for the Indian context, for use of this model, for example, in agriculture, right? In
Mm-hmm.
Telugu, right? Agriculture in Telugu, I have tested this model and it is not making any bias statements. It is not, favorable towards one set of farmers versus the other and things like that. So that maybe I can give you a technical evaluation, and based on that, then you can decide to go ahead. Right? But a techno-legal would be perhaps have this whole thing, very clearly enforceable from the very beginning. Right? That it's not clear to me how would we do it in every context. So the one thing which people seem to have a handle on is the privacy angle of it. I mean, so has the privacy clearance been obtained and so on and so forth. So that's where I was talking about the digital certificate. So that seems to be some place where people have a handle. And the people who can solve it might claim that that's the only thing that we need to solve using techno-legal solutions, but I don't think that's sufficient. So wherever it is available, we should adopt it. I'm not saying that we shouldn't, right?
Mm-hmm.
In fact, that is an ideal way to do it. But since the technology is not yet available, so one of the things that we have recommended as a substitute in the governance guidelines is to have voluntary commitments from the AI developers, AI model builders, and AI application builders. So everybody should have some kind of broad voluntary commitments that they agree to. That will ensure safe and responsible use of AI eventually. But let's not indefinitely take their word for it. While these voluntary commitments are needed for us to get going, let's work in parallel to build the technology that will allow us to verify them, and so eventually move towards a techno-legal framework where I don't have to worry about the voluntary commitments, people sticking to the voluntary commitments.
Yes. So, earlier you had been, I would say, talking about regulate the application and not the technology.
Mm. Yeah.
How does this distinction mean in practical regulatory terms, and how should it shape India's approach to AI governance?
I mean, what we meant by that, right? I mean, many of us were actually saying, not just me.
Mm-hmm.
Look at some of the early regulatory guidelines that were coming from the US, right? They were talking about, okay, how many parameters can you use in your AI model, right? So how much power can the AI model draw and things like that, right? So those were essentially trying to limit your model building ability itself, right? And what happens is the technology moves so fast that some of those regulations become moot very quickly. In fact, in a matter of months, if I say that, okay, I can't build a model that is bigger than this, 10 billion parameters or something like that, I'll achieve the same capacity that I can achieve with a 10 billion parameter today. I'll achieve that with 8 billion in 6 months. So what happened? What are you regulating, right? So those kinds of regulations essentially don't have a very long-standing what to say implications, yeah, or relevance, long-standing relevance. They become quickly irrelevant, right? But then if you start talking about the application itself, right? So for example, we talked about finance, we talked about agriculture, we talked about education. So there you can, or healthcare, right? There you can regulate the applications. I don't care what model you use, but the model that you finally, when I deploy, right, it should make sure that every sector of the population gets the equal service in terms of how good my healthcare advice that I give to that person is. Right? It should not be that, okay, the healthcare advice is very good for people who have urban lifestyle related distances, diseases, but not very good for people coming from rural areas. That kind of a divide shouldn't be there. But that I can basically mandate, regardless of what is the complexity of the model. If you're able to do that with a small model, great. If you need a big model, that's fine. But at the end of the day, this is what I should ensure when the services are being delivered. So that is, we think, is something that has a much more longer scope, right? And also, regardless of how the technology evolves, these regulations will stay relevant.
So the MITI has recently released, they proposed amendments to the IT Rules 2021 addressing deepfakes and AI-generated content. In your view, do these amendments align with the broader philosophy of the AI governance guidelines, or is there way too more?
Mostly. So I think at the principal level, there is broad guidelines. In fact, when they released that amendment, the guidelines are more or less ready. So they actually looked at it, and then so we were in alignment in some sense. But there are a few things which I think are either unenforceable, right, or not quite necessary. Right. So, for example, things like, at least 10% of the surface area should be taken up by an AI label, and those kinds of things. Right? That doesn't make sense to me. Suppose it's audio deepfake. So what do you mean by 10%? The first 10%, if it's a 1 hour audio, the first 6 minutes should be, I don't know, hey, this is AI, this is AI, this is AI. I mean, exactly, right? So it's not clear what this translate to. And there are also other applications where I would want to use, for example, an AI generated imagery in making a video. Right? I'm making a video. It's very clear that it's an AI generated imagery. But I don't want to put 10% of the screen time saying that this is AI. That might take away the value of the production itself.
Yes.
Right. Suppose suppose Amitabh Bachchan or somebody is flying around on the screen, and I'm using AI to generate that image. Right. Yeah. So I don't want to say, this is AI Amitabh Bachchan flying and 10% of the screen. Right? That takes away the worth of that image itself. Right. So I think we have to think about what the application is, right, before we give this kind of universal guidelines as to how you should label it. And it should be clearly labeled. And whether it is visible or whether it is digitally verified is a question that we have. So these are things like, there are a few minor implementation things that there is no question that AI generated content should be clearly identifiable as AI generated content, if you are doing it in a legal manner, right? If you are trying to do something illegal, then of course that's a different issue. But if any legal use of AI should be clearly labeled that it is AI. Whether it should be visibly clearly labeled or digitally clearly labeled, should it be a watermark that you can read with special purpose software? All of these things is a debate. So these are all details, or I think we went a little bit overboard in specifying some of the details. So that is one part. The second part of it is, there are phrases like, to the best of your ability, you should verify whether something is an AI generated content or not.
Yes.
It's not clear to me what is best of my ability means, right?
Yeah.
So those kinds of things could have been more precise and tightened. But in principle, I think we are very much in agreement with what the governance guidelines says and the amendment says. There's no question about